Have you ever been to a place so beautiful, so pristine, that it feels untouched by the chaos of the modern world? Yet beneath that beauty lies a silence that feels almost watchful. Crater Lake National Park, in Oregon's Klamath County, is one of those rare places. Perched in the heart of the Cascade Range in the southwest corner of the state, it is a land where nature still holds dominion, where ancient forests breathe in the cold mountain air, and where winter cloaks the earth in a white so pure it seems to swallow sound itself. The park is a tapestry of landscapes, vast evergreen forests stretching in every direction, gentle meadows where snow-laden wildflowers bow their heads to the weight of ice, and cliffs that rise like frozen walls above it all. The wind here carries a sharp, almost metallic crispness, the kind that clears your lungs and makes every breath feel alive. In summer, it is a place of hikers and campers, photographers and families, all drawn to the central jewel of the park, Crater Lake itself. The lake is unlike any other. 21 square miles of still, hypnotic water, a deep, almost unnatural shade of azure, fill the crater left by the collapse of Mount Mazama over 7,000 years ago. By average depth, it is the third deepest lake in the world, and in the United States, no body of water runs deeper. Its water is so clear you can see nearly 100 feet down, and in winter, the snow-covered caldera walls make it look like something out of another world. Yet, for all its beauty, it has an edge, a sense that it holds its secrets close. And in 1975, it claimed one of those secrets in the form of a 19-year-old man named Charles McCullough, an aspiring photographer full of restless ambition who came to the park to capture its winter majesty on film, and never returned. Charles was not just another visitor passing through. He had set out from his home in Virginia in 1974 on what was meant to be the adventure of a lifetime, a cross-country journey fueled by the promise of new horizons and a dream to document the wild, untamed beauty of America. He traveled light but carried the most important thing to him, his camera. By bus, by foot, and sometimes by the kindness of strangers, he crisscrossed the country, stopping to hike through remote trails, to sleep under the stars, and to record what he saw in the pages of his photographic travel journal. When he arrived in Eugene, Oregon, in January of 1975, it was deep winter in the Cascades. Snow blanketed the higher elevations, and the cold could bite through layers of clothing. Still, the promise of capturing Crater Lake in its frozen, snow-draped state was too tempting to resist. He stayed for a short while with a friend in town, sharing his plans and his excitement. He told his friend he was heading to Crater Lake for just 2 days, a quick winter photography trip. He packed his camping gear, checked his camera, and prepared to set out. For Charles, it wasn't unusual. He was known for his independence, for taking off into the wilderness at a moment's notice. His friend thought nothing of it when he stepped out the door with the easy confidence of someone who had done this many times before. 2 days came and went. No Charles. 3 days. Still nothing. At first, his friend assumed Charles had simply found more to photograph or decided to take the long way home. But when a 4th day passed with no word, the first threads of worry began to pull tight. He reported Charles missing. Searchers quickly learned that Charles had last been seen in the Diamond Lake area, roughly a 45-minute drive from Crater Lake itself. Some witnesses claimed he continued on toward the lake. Others said they'd seen him hiking up the park's North Road, a puzzling detail, considering that route was buried under nearly 5 feet of snow at the time. It would have been slow, exhausting travel, even for someone experienced. Speculation began almost immediately. Had he tried the North Road, only to be forced back by the deep snow? Had he chosen another route entirely? No one knew for certain. There was no sign of him, no tracks, no abandoned campsite, no trace at all. His father, refusing to accept uncertainty, flew out from Virginia to join the search. He camped along the shore of the lake through the summer, his presence a constant reminder that someone still waited for answers. The search expanded to include locals, volunteers, and eventually the FBI. A move that made some stop and wonder. Federal involvement in a missing persons case, especially one in a remote park, was rare. And it hinted at something more than a simple case of a lost hiker. The snow was the enemy that year. In some areas, drifts rose 12 feet high, hiding the landscape under an unbroken white. Even after the melt, the forest yielded nothing. No scraps of fabric, no misplaced gear, no footprints preserved in shadowed places. It was as if the earth itself had sealed up behind him. By the end of that first winter, Charles's absence had begun to weigh heavily on everyone involved. His father's days fell into a rhythm of quiet endurance, waking early, scanning the lake's edge, hiking to vantage points, and returning at night to a lonely camp. The park itself seemed indifferent, its vast expanse swallowing sound and movement. The FBI's involvement became a quiet undercurrent of conversation among searchers. What did they suspect? Foul play? Something more unusual? Friends back in Virginia couldn't understand why federal agents would take interest unless there were deeper concerns. One of them even wrote to Senator William L. Scott, hoping for clarity. But there was no public explanation. Theories sprouted in the absence of evidence. Some speculated that Charles had decided to walk away from his life, starting over somewhere new. Those who knew him best dismissed this out of hand. He was devoted to his photography, to his family, and to the life he had built. Others wondered if he had simply gotten lost, a tragic miscalculation that ended with him succumbing to the brutal cold. And then there was the darker possibility that he had encountered someone in the backcountry whose intentions were far from kind. But with no proof of anything, law enforcement drifted toward the simplest explanation: misadventure in the wilderness. Officially, there was nothing to indicate foul play. Privately, some in his circle could not shake the sense that something deliberate had happened. As weeks turned into months, hope faded but never fully died. His father kept his vigil until the season changed, the snow receded, and the reality became impossible to ignore. Charles was gone. The search was scaled back. The case went cold. It would remain that way for more than a year. Then, in October 1976, a pair of hikers moving through a remote canyon stumbled across something strange. The location was wild and far from the park's main trails, a place where even experienced hikers rarely went. There, lying torn and weather-beaten, was a backpack. The hikers carried it to the nearest ranger station. Inside a side pocket was a single key, a Volkswagen key. The detail meant nothing to them, but it meant everything to Rangers Larry Smith and Marion Jack. They compared the key to a photocopy of one known to belong to Charles McCullough. It was a match. For the first time in nearly 2 years, there was a tangible link to the missing man. A patrol was sent on horseback into the canyon near Bybee Creek, the area where the backpack had been discovered. The forest there was thick, the ground uneven, and the sense of isolation deep. Moving carefully, the searchers began scanning the ground for any sign of human presence. And then they saw it. A pair of jeans draped across a fallen log. The jeans looked oddly intact for something left to the elements for nearly 2 years. The fabric was faded, the stitching weathered but still solid. Inside the socks, still in the legs of the jeans, were bones, small, fragile toe bones, broken but still recognizable. Inside the jeans themselves, searchers found pieces of shin bone, also snapped. There was no shirt, no coat, no boots. The belt was unbuckled, the fly unfastened, as though the person had begun to remove them in the cold. Searchers would later say it was as if the man had simply melted away. A dozen feet away, they found the crown of a skull and a scattering of tiny bone fragments. Beyond that, nothing. No camera, no wallet, no other clothing. Just fragments of a life abruptly cut off. The scene raised far more questions than it answered. How had Charles traveled 12 miles from his supposed campsite, in deep snow, without shoes, to this remote, rugged canyon? Why had he been there at all? And why were his remains in such a strange condition, so little left after less than 2 years? The search team worked in near silence as they documented the site. Every step had to be careful. The terrain was uneven, and the dense forest floor made it easy to overlook small pieces of evidence. They collected the jeans with their bone fragments, the crown of the skull, and anything else that might help reconstruct the final moments of Charles's life. But as they pieced the scene together, a troubling reality became clear. This was not the typical outcome of a hiker lost to the elements. There were too many unanswered questions, too many details that didn't quite fit. For one thing, the location itself was baffling. The Bybee Creek area was more than 12 miles from where Charles was believed to have camped, across snow-covered terrain that would have been extremely difficult to cross, even in full winter gear. For someone without shoes, and there was no trace of his boots. The journey would have been almost unthinkable. Then there was the state of the remains. Rangers and investigators were struck by how little was left. The jeans, despite their exposure to the elements, were in relatively good condition. Yet the rest of Charles's clothing, his coat, shirt, and boots, had vanished completely. His personal belongings, including his camera and wallet, were also nowhere to be found. Authorities offered an explanation rooted in hypothermia, specifically a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing. It's a strange and counterintuitive behavior seen in some people suffering from severe hypothermia. As their body temperature drops dangerously low, nerve and brain function begin to misfire, creating the false sensation of heat. In a confused state, the victim may begin to shed clothing, accelerating their decline. But even if paradoxical undressing explained the missing clothes, it didn't account for the total disappearance of the rest of his gear. Where were his coat and boots? Where was his backpack before it was found? And how did those items end up separated from the remains by such distance? More troubling still was the bone placement. The toe bones still inside the socks suggested that the feet had remained in place long after the rest of the body was gone. The shin bones, broken and incomplete, were still inside the jeans. And then, 12 feet away, the crown of the skull and tiny fragments lay alone, separated from the rest. It was as if the body had simply disassembled in place, the parts scattered by an unseen hand. The official conclusion was simple, almost frustratingly so: death by natural causes. The most likely scenario, according to the report, was that Charles became disoriented in the snow, succumbed to hypothermia, and his remains were later scattered by wildlife. But for his family, especially his brother Steve, this explanation was thin, a theory built on convenience rather than evidence. Steve believed that Charles's disappearance and the condition of his remains pointed to something more sinister. He speculated that Charles might have been picked up by someone, robbed of his valuable camera equipment and money, then killed, possibly shot in the head, before his body was taken to this remote location, in the hopes that winter and wild animals would erase the evidence. The fact that the FBI had been involved from the early stages only fueled the family's suspicions. It was rare for them to be called into a straightforward case of a lost hiker. Their presence suggested that from the beginning, someone in authority believed there might be more to this story. For the McCullough family, the official ruling felt like a door being shut before the truth had a chance to step through. They had lived with uncertainty for nearly 2 years, clinging to the hope that Charles might somehow return. Now they were left with a scattering of bones, a battered pair of jeans, and an explanation that didn't match what their instincts told them. Friends who had known Charles on the road spoke of his resilience, his caution in the wild, and his habit of preparing thoroughly before any hike. They found it difficult to believe he would have wandered unprepared into deep snow without a plan, or that he would have made a 12-mile trek into one of the most inaccessible corners of the park without proper gear. To them, the idea that he had simply lost his way and collapsed didn't make sense. Even the physical evidence, or lack of it, seemed to work against the official version. Where had his coat gone? His camera, the one tool he guarded most fiercely, was missing. His boots were gone. His wallet vanished. If animals had scattered his remains, why had the jeans survived intact, along with the bones inside them? Why were the skull fragments so far from the rest? Each question led only to more uncertainty. For hikers and outdoor enthusiasts, Charles's story became a quiet, cautionary tale. One not always told around campfires or on trailheads, but whispered in the pauses between conversations. It was a reminder that the wilderness can be both breathtaking and merciless, that even those who respect it can vanish without warning. Park officials and rescue volunteers emphasized the lessons: carry a map and compass, know how to navigate without GPS, pack extra food, water, and weather-appropriate clothing. Leave a detailed itinerary with someone you trust. Inform park rangers of your route and return time. And above all, understand the signs of hypothermia before you set foot on a snow-covered trail. Hypothermia does not announce itself with a sudden collapse. It begins quietly, with shivering, fumbling fingers and a slowing mind. In advanced stages, confusion can set in, leading to paradoxical undressing, where the body, overwhelmed by cold, sends the brain the wrong message, that it's overheating. Removing clothes in such conditions can turn a dangerous situation into a fatal one in minutes. Still, safety advice could not erase the more unsettling aspects of this case. Crater Lake remained the same, serene, magnificent, and utterly silent about what had happened. Bybee Creek, where the remains were found, was as remote and rugged as ever, its tangled undergrowth and twisting channels seeming to resist intrusion. To this day, no one can say for certain how Charles traveled so far from his presumed campsite, or why. No one knows where the rest of his belongings went, or how his remains ended up in such an odd condition. Theories range from the purely natural, a tragic accident compounded by wildlife activity, to the human and deliberate. The FBI's early involvement lingers like a shadow over the story, a detail that refuses to fade. Was it simply protocol, or did they know something that never made it into the public record? Nearly 5 decades later, the questions remain. The official file on Charles McCullough lists his death as natural causes, but to his family, it has never felt settled. They carry with them the belief that something, or someone, out there knows the truth. And so Crater Lake holds its secret still. Share your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think happened to Charles McCullough? Was it the merciless hand of winter, or the work of human cruelty hidden beneath the snow?